very strong recovery for the Northeast. So, Mr. President, I thank the members for their suggestions and look forward to the debate, and hopefully we can get this supplemental done before this Congress adjourns. I think the people of the Northeast and the rest of our country is depending on us to do that, and I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The Senator from Arizona.
Is the parliamentary situation in order that I could send an amendment to the desk? I have an amendment at the desk and ask for its immediate consideration.
Is there objection to setting aside the pending amendment? Without objection.
Mr. President, number 3355, McCain-Coburn. I ask unanimous consent that Senator Coburn be added as co-sponsor. Amendment number 3355.
Senator from Arizona, Mr. McCain, for himself and Mr. Coburn, proposes an amendment number 3355.
I ask unanimous consent that further reading of the debate, the amendment be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Mr. President, this amendment is a very simple one. It calls for striking the funding of some $58 million for the USADA, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, quote, forest restoration program for planting trees on private property. It's actually a farm bill subsidy program that's run by a relatively unknown agency that's called the Farm Service Administration, which is primarily responsible for managing crop insurance. Under this program, private landowners with about 50 acres of land can apply for up to $500,000 in free grants for tree planting activities. Obviously, this has nothing to do with an emergency, and there's nothing in the supplemental that limits the funding to Hurricane Sandy areas. Under this bill, this $58 million can be used just about anywhere. I'd like to make a few remarks about the bill itself so we have this in the right context here. First of all, I want our colleagues, everyone, to understand that there are none of us who do not support, there's no one who doesn't support giving the much-needed funding as quickly as possible to help relieve the tragedy of Hurricane Sandy. And we believe that there are important parts of this appropriations bill that we should pass immediately. But we also believe that there are many provisions in this bill that both have nothing to do with Hurricane Sandy, and many of the programs in this bill won't even take effect before the year 2015. We're about to reach the year 2013. So, and we can't consider this much-needed appropriation outside of the context we now have nearly a $17 trillion debt. And obviously, none of this $60 billion, which is now going to be added to the debt, because none of it is paid for. So let's be clear about this. With a $16 trillion debt and a mortgaging of our children's future, Mr. President, I note the presence of the majority leader. Mr. President, I note the presence of the majority leader. Did he wish to speak? Mr. President, again, I'd like to say, every one of my colleagues on this side of the aisle want to act quickly to provide the much-needed relief for the people who have been impacted by the horrible effects of Hurricane Sandy. But we cannot consider this legislation in a vacuum. We're looking at a $17 trillion debt, somewhere over between $16 and $17 trillion. We have committed generational theft. We have mortgaged our children and our grandchildren's future. And so we must be very careful as to how much more of the taxpayers' dollars spent for what and when is this money necessary. That's the questions this body should be asking itself. And I would argue that there's a whole lot of billions of dollars in this bill that fit into the categories of, one, not necessary, not in, as a result of the impact of the Hurricane Sandy, and certainly not an emergency situation. So I'd like to go over some of the projects that are in this bill, and some of them hold merit. Some of the projects in this bill are very meritorious. It goes way beyond emergency aid and funds projects, and as I said, at a time when we face these deficits, we can't justify this spending. And again, I want to emphasize, some of the projects are meritorious, but they should go through the normal budget and appropriations process where Congress has time to vet the need for such spending requests. The CBO examined both the Senate bill and the administration's request and found, and this is from the Congressional Budget Office, 64% of the funds appropriated under the Sandy supplemental will not be spent until fiscal years 2015 to 2022 and after, therefore raising concerns about the rush to spend $60.4 billion without any attempt to pay for it. 2 weeks ago, FEMA Director Fugate told the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee that the Disaster Relief Fund currently has enough money and will not need additional funding until the spring of 2013. CBO's assessment, combined with the statement of Director Fugate, clearly shows that we need to pass a Sandy supplemental bill that only includes prioritized disaster aid funding. I and my colleague from Oklahoma, Senator Coburn, have been examining this bill over the last few days. And I will tell my colleagues we've not gotten all the way through it. We haven't identified a lot of these spending bills, of what they're for and where they came from. The appropriators and their staff, I always admire. They've turned it into an art form, and our ability to ferret out some of these appropriations has required a great deal of hard work and effort. So we have billions to replace, quote, federal assets damaged by the storm, including automobiles owned by the federal government. The federal government currently owns or leases over 660,000 vehicles. Do you think we could find replacements within our own inventory, the current inventory? Shouldn't we focus on providing relief directly to those still trying to rebuild their lives before replacing a bureaucrat's car? $2 million to repair damage to the roofs of museums in Washington, D.C., while many in Hurricane Sandy's path still have no permanent roof over their own heads. $150 million for fisheries as far away from a storm's path as Mississippi and Alaska. $125 million for the Department of Agriculture's Emergency Watershed Protection Program, which helps restore watersheds damaged by wildfires and drought for areas including Colorado, and by the way, including my own state of Arizona. And that money is needed. It is needed. We are having wildfires across the Southwest and the West in an unprecedented fashion because we are in severe drought. And I want that money for the Department of Agriculture's Emergency Watershed Protection Program, but it has nothing to do with Hurricane Sandy. And that's what's wrong with this bill. I'll fight for the $125 million that would help my state of Arizona, and I'll fight to find ways to pay for it. And I'll do both. But we're including $125 million for the Department of Agriculture's Emergency Watershed Protection Program, which is several hundred miles away from the path of Hurricane Sandy. $20 million for a nationwide water resources priority study. While studies are important, they're not emergencies and should be submitted during the upcoming budget debate. Now, we need badly a water resources priority study. There was just a recent study about the Colorado River Basin and how we are going to run out of water. But again, the Water Resources Priority Study is not associated with Hurricane Sandy. $15 million for NASA facilities, though NASA itself has called its damage from the hurricane, quote, minimal. One day after the storm hit, NASA's Wallops Island put out a statement stating that, quote, an initial assessment team surveyed roads and facilities at NASA's Wallops Flight Facility today, reporting a number of downed trees, but otherwise minimal impact in the wake of Hurricane Sandy. Does this mean that we need $15 million for NASA's facilities? $336 million for taxpayer-supported Amtrak without a detailed plan for how the money will be spent. Some of the funding will go for repairs. Money will also go to increasing capacity and future mitigation efforts. Amtrak is up and running. Amtrak is up and running. You go right over here, not very far from here, at Union Station and get on Amtrak. It's not apparent why this funding is deemed emergency spending and included in this spending package. Further mitigation should be debated next year. The dirty little secret is that Amtrak loses billions of dollars every year. And that's because we subsidize unneeded and unnecessary routes. The route on the East Coast, from here to New York, for example, makes money. But we cling to those routes that neither make money nor does anybody care to patronize. $5.3 billion for the Army Corps of Engineers, more than the Army Corps of Engineers' annual budget. $5.3 billion for the Army Corps of Engineers, more than their annual budget, with no clarity as to how the money will be spent. Included in the bill, the Senate bill, is $50 million in funding for more studies, which will most definitely lead to additional Army Corps projects, and a new task force established by executive order. More projects are not something the Army Corps can handle. They're currently experiencing a backlog of construction and maintenance projects of approximately $70 billion. Furthermore, a 2010 report released by the Government Accountability Office noted that carryover funds have increased, quote, due to the large amount of supplemental funding the Corps has received in recent years. Clearly, supplemental spending on the Army Corps has not paid off. The bill includes $12 to $13 billion for future disaster mitigation activities and studies without identifying a single way to pay for it. I think we need future disaster mitigation activities. We need studies. We are experiencing climate situations which we never anticipated. Certainly, Hurricane Sandy was never anticipated by any of us. We need the studies. But that's not an emergency to handle the effects of Hurricane Sandy and should come out of normal funding and paid for. I support these studies, but should they come out of the taxpayer's pocket without a way to pay for it? There's no justification to include these projects in this emergency spending bill. Waiting to fund these projects until next year during the normal budget and appropriations process, we'll have a better understanding of the path forward and reduce the possibility of waste, fraud, and abuse. There's $10 million to improve weather forecasting capabilities and infrastructure. $10 million to improve weather forecasting capabilities and infrastructure. Do we really need to include that as an emergency funding bill for Hurricane Sandy? As I mentioned at the beginning, at some point, we're going to have to start paying for things. At some point, we're going to run out of Chinese money. At some point, we're going to be like Greece. At some point, the American people are going to say enough. Every American family has to balance their budget. Every American family has to make tough decisions. Why don't we make some tough decisions if we want to have things paid for like weather capabilities, like Amtrak, like replace federal assets, buying vehicles when we have 660,000 vehicles in the inventory. Why don't we start making tough decisions? I often mention that the approval rating that we have of the American people is rather interestingly low. The last one I saw was 11% approval. No wonder. We're about, in a matter literally of hours, to spend about $60 billion of the American taxpayers' money. Estimates of some is that it should be around $24 billion, without hearings, without the kinds of scrutiny that it deserves in the normal appropriations process. And I understand why we need some of this money in emergency fashion. But it's like the train leaving the station. It's loaded up with pork, and it's moving, and so everybody wants to get on board. It's not the way that the Congress should do business. So, Mr. President, I will ask for the yeas and nays on my amendment, which is to strike funding for $58 million for the tree planting subsidy known as the Forest Restoration Program for planting trees on private property.
Is the senator asking for the yeas and nays?
I'm asking for the yeas and nays.
Is there a sufficient second?
Okay.
There does not appear to be.
And I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka. Suspension of the quorum call, so I might speak about the passing of our dear friend, Senator Inouye.
The senator from Michigan has asked to dispense with the quorum, but there is an objection. You want me to say that? Is there objection?
I ask for the yeas and nays on my amendment.
Is there a sufficient second? There does not appear to be a sufficient second.
I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
So they know you'll get.
She just wants to talk on a no way.
Okay.
The senator from Michigan,
I would ask suspension of the quorum call.
without objection.
Appreciate my colleagues' consideration. I would like very much to speak in morning business. I would ask unanimous consent to speak in morning business.
Without objection.
Thank you very much. Mr. President, I rise today, as so many colleagues have done throughout today, to pay tribute to a tremendous colleague that we lost yesterday, a friend to all of us, someone that we have all learned a tremendous amount from on both sides of the aisle about how to work together, Senator Daniel Inouye of Hawaii. He was an outstanding senator, a cherished colleague, and a dear, dear friend. We all know he dedicated his life to serving our country, first as a soldier in World War II, being willing to put his life on the line for our freedoms, for our country, and then as a member of Congress for 53 years. Senator Inouye was Hawaii's first congressman, Think about that. The first congressman, and today marks the first day in the history of our country that the state of Hawaii has not been represented in Congress by Dan Inouye. He also had a special connection to my home state of Michigan, and Senator Levin and I both have been very proud of that fact. He was a patient at a hospital in Battle Creek during World War II, where he met Phil Hart and Bob Dole. And can you imagine those three great men coming together, serving our country, wounded, doing rehabilitation at a hospital together in Michigan, and all going on to be involved in public service as United States senators. That building is still standing. It's no longer a hospital. It's another federal building, and it's our great honor in Michigan to have that building named the Hart Dole Inouye Federal Center, honoring all three of these outstanding leaders. Senator Inouye was a great mentor for me, as well as so many of us in the Senate. Coming to the Senate, always encouraging me during the elections, always telling me, hang in there, and things would go well, and it would be great. And always the person with a smile on his face, encouraging each and every one of us. He was there encouraging me when we were fighting for our economic lives in Michigan with the automobile industry, saying it was going to be okay, we'd be able to get through it, and that things would be better on the other side. And he was right, with the help of so many people here and with the President. He also has consistently said to me, I want to help your city of Detroit. I want to make sure that I can do everything I can to support that great city. And he has been a wonderful friend and supporter on that front as well. He also received a distinguished honor given by the Arab American community in Michigan after he helped us establish the first National Arab American Museum. And after 9/11, when there were stories of young Arab American children, young girls who were being harassed or attacked with wearing their traditional garb in school, he called up leaders in Michigan to tell them that they had his support as a Japanese American, knowing what he had gone through at a very difficult time in our country's history. He showed incredible support to a great part of Michigan, our communities. And he's beloved by so many around Michigan, but no more than those who are in the Arab American community, who are business leaders, community leaders, who found themselves, just because of their heritage, in very difficult circumstances. She has shown great support to them and was a great role model to them. And so I was proud to be a part of honoring him a few years ago in Michigan with the highest award coming from that community. He touched lives everywhere he went. He served with quiet dignity, had a strong, firm conscience. He set an example for each one of us. He was a true patriot and a true American hero in every sense of the word. The United States Senate and the American people will miss him greatly. And my thoughts and prayers are with his family this evening. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Mr. President.
Senator from Montana.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to set aside the pending amendment, call up my amendment number 3350.
Is there objection? Without objection, so ordered. Clerk.
Senator from Montana, Mr. Tester.
I ask that
for himself and others proposes amendment 3350.
Dispensed with.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that Senator Tim Johnson of South Dakota be added as a co-sponsor to Amendment 3350.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a few remarks on Amendment 3350. This past summer was the third worst fire year in the history of this great country. Over 9.2 million acres burned. Over 1 million of those acres were in the state of Montana. The drought that drove this year's fire season persists, and it's projected to worsen in 2013, creating conditions for an equally or potentially greater fire season this upcoming year.
33, 38.
And this trend isn't stopping. Conditions are changing on the ground.
Thanks.
I think we're all seeing impacts. I'm certainly seeing impacts on my family farm, and we're seeing impacts across the forests of this country, and western Montana is no exception. My amendment with Senator Udall does two things. First, it provides funding for the difference between the current funding request to prepare for and suppress wildfire and the amount the 2013 fire season is expected to cost. The second thing it does is it requires the GAO to make recommendations on a better model to project the costs of wildfires into the future. Wildfires are continuing to burn and burn hotter and faster and larger and earlier and doing more damage than in past years. We need to make sure that we have the resources to address these catastrophic events that are here this next year and with the study into the future. With that, I want to thank you. I yield the floor. Suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
having a quorum called.
Senate is in a quorum
I ask
call.
consent that be terminated.
Without objection.
Mr. President, the Senate's been considering the supplemental appropriation bill for 2 days now. The Republicans, I'm told, are in the process of trying to figure out what they want to do. We have other concerns, as you know. We had the tragedy in Connecticut. We had the untimely death of our friend Senator Inouye. But time doesn't stop for anything. It keeps marching on. Christmas is coming. We have a fiscal cliff that's in the horizon. So I hope we can make progress on this bill in the morning. If not, I'll be forced to file cloture to try to figure out a path forward on this bill. It's been open for amendment. That's what my friends said they wanted. That's what they have. We have the DOD authorization. We need to complete action on that conference report that's been completed now. We expect that they will file tonight or tomorrow, so we need to complete that before the end of the week. Christmas is 7 days from today. We have judicial nominations. We've been making some progress with the district court nominations. We have to do 3 more before the end of the week. We have executive nominations that we need to consider before the end of the week. FISA. Mr. President, this is an important piece of legislation. Imperfect as it is what is necessary to help us be protected from the evil that's in the world. We have to complete this before we leave here this week. Today's Tuesday. So everyone else can do the math just as well as I can about how many days are left. So I ask unanimous consent that a time to be determined by me, after consultation with Senator McConnell, the Senate proceed to the consideration of calendar number 463, S3276, that the only first-degree amendments in order of the bill be the following: Judiciary Committee reported substitute, Leahy sunset, Leahy oversight, widen public reporting, widen backdoor searches, tester reverse targeting, and Merkley, which is about declassification of FISA court opinions. That there be an hour of debate equally divided between the proponents and opponents on each amendment. That there be up to 2 hours of debate on the bill equally divided between the proponents and opponents. That upon the use or reading back of that time, the Senate proceed to votes in relation to the amendments in the order listed. That there be no amendments in order to any of the amendments prior to the votes. That upon disposition of the amendments, the bill be read a third time and the Senate proceed to vote on passage of the bill as amended, if amended. Now, Mr. President, before the chair rules on this, it's pretty easy to figure out how much time this includes. This is the better part of a day, if we got this consent done. So I ask that the chair approve the consent agreement.
Is there objection?
Mr. President, reserving the right to object, and I do intend to object. First of all, I want to say to the leader, thanks for moving towards the FISA bill, because you're exactly right. This is a bill that must get done by the end of the year so that we can make sure that our intelligence community is able to gather in a lawful and legal way the kind of intelligence that keeps Americans safe and secure. There are 2 documents. One, a statement of administration policy from the White House where they have agreed to the bill that has already passed the House. And secondly, a letter from the leadership of the intelligence community, namely the Director of National Intelligence as well as the Attorney General, directed to the leadership, both of which letters and statements support the House bill. And it's because of that and because of the fact that if the House bill comes through here, and I understand we may have to have debate, may have to have amendments debated, whatever the leader decides, but the important thing is that we can hopefully get that bill passed and send it directly to the President's desk. So I would ask unanimous consent that the letter from the DNI and the Attorney General dated February 8th, as well as the Statement of Administration Policy dated September 10, be included in the record. And, Mr. President, I do object.
Objection is heard, and without objection, the letters will be included.
Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
I'll continue to work on a path forward. If anyone has any ideas how to help me with that, I would be happy to listen to them. But this is something we must do before we leave here. Christmas is not more important than this legislation. I'm sorry, I hope I'm not offending anyone, but that's the way it is. We have to get something done on this before the end of the year. And I think we'll be walking on a very, very thin ice to try to wait until after Christmas to try to do this legislation. It's hard for me to comprehend the potential damage to our country if we did not extend this legislation.
Mr. President,
Senator from Oklahoma.
I ask that the pending amendment be set aside and amendment number 3368 be called up.
Is there objection? The Majority Leader.
I want to do amendments, but I feel somewhat ill at ease here with not having anybody that's managing the bill at all. So I would hope that my friend will. We'll be happy to try to. I'll talk to Senator Leahy, and I'll talk to. But I just don't. I'm not in a position here to agree because I'm not going to. One thing I'm not going to do, regardless of what the managers say, we're not going to have a big stack of amendments here that we're going to be worrying about. So I don't know where everybody is, but the managers aren't here. So I'm happy to.
Through the chair, I'd ask the majority, he does not want amendments to be made pending for us to debate. And
President, do we have amendments pending now?
There are amendments.
How many pending?
There's a substitute amendment and 4 first-degree amendments pending.
And you're filing a first-degree amendment?
I am.
One more shouldn't do much damage.
I'm sorry, I did not hear.
One more couldn't do much damage.
Well, I have 5 that I was going to place pending, and then I would be happy to work with the managers.
Yes, I say to my friend again, through you, Mr. President, I'm happy to do one, but I'm not going to, the managers, I haven't talked to them in the last couple hours. I'm not going to agree to 5 amendments. I have no idea what's in them. If you want to lay down one of the amendments tonight, that's fine, but I'm not going to, until we have managers on the floor, I'm not going to agree to that.
Senator from Oklahoma.
Well, then I'd ask unanimous consent that the pending amendment be set aside and that amendment number 3371 be called up.
Is there objection? Without objection, the clerk will report the amendment.
Senator from Oklahoma, Mr. Coburn, for himself and Mr. McCain, proposes an amendment number 3371. At the appropriate
I ask unanimous consent that the amendment be considered as read.
Without objection.
Now, if I may.
The majority.
I would also say to my friend, the junior senator from Oklahoma, the managers are going to be here bright and early in the morning, and I'm confident. In fact, I'll go call one of them right now, and if you could be here.
It's fine. I will. I have no choice but to accede to your wishes, so I will. But I'd make the following point.
Will the senator from Oklahoma yield for a question?
Absolutely.
Because I have a section of this bill, and I wonder if that amendment is relevant to my bill. I might extend some courtesy here.
This is updating the per capita damage indicator and the process for determining declarations. Oklahoma has had more declarations declared, but we haven't updated the per capita indicator in a long time, so we've had no increase in that. So what is happening is it's too easy to get a declaration declared.
Right. So
I'm trying to have them update that to where it's more reflective of the true cost.
I appreciate the senator's advocacy for Oklahoma and for
Well, this
others
would
of us.
actually hurt Oklahoma.
But what I wanted to say to the gentleman from Oklahoma, my subcommittee deals with coastal impact. So the issue the senator wishes to raise is with the subcommittee on Homeland Security. So if it had dealt with my part of the bill, I would have stayed here and we could have had a debate. Because I know what you're trying to do, and I appreciate it, which is to move the Senate forward in an expeditious way.
I thank the Senator.
Mr. President,
Senator from Oklahoma.
We have a bill before us that's $64 billion, and I've spent the last week trying to get OMB and the Department of Commerce the background on all these requests. And what I can tell you is there is immediate needs for about $24 billion that we ought to be passing through this chamber to take care of immediate needs over the next 2 years in relation to the ship to this tragedy in terms of Sandy. Almost every amendment I'm going to offer or hope to offer is about transparency, is about limiting who can have access, like people who are arrears on their taxes for years and years and years. What we learned on Homeland Security Committee, who has the authorization of most of these programs, which I will become ranking member of, that out of the $100 billion plus that we spent on Katrina, $11 billion of it got wasted. And one of the reasons it got wasted is because we didn't have transparency, we didn't have good government amendments in it, and we're getting ready to make that mistake again. So I was asked to come down by our side of the aisle to have amendments pending, and now that I can't have amendments pending, I think I'll just talk in general about this bill for a moment, if I might. There's no one in the Senate that does not want to meet the needs of the people who have suffered from this horrific storm. How we do that is important. Meeting immediate needs in terms of the insurance fund for flooding. That's something everybody would agree on that. Nobody's going to object to that. We're going to be short on that. But also as important in that is that we should have a provision that if you were in a floodplain and didn't buy the insurance, we certainly should not be ponying up our grandkids' money to pay for you when you chose not to insure it. And the reason that's important, there's two moral principles why that's important. One is we're going to endorse irresponsibility. Number two is if we don't put that provision in this bill, the flood insurance program is never going to work. Because everybody in the future is going to say, don't worry, you don't have to buy the flood insurance. The Congress is going to take care of you. So it's just those kind of good government things that I'm trying to put into this bill, and now I'm unable to bring amendments to the floor, which is, there's no reason not to bring amendments to the floor right now. We're going to pick and choose what amendments we're going to bring to the floor when we have good government amendments. I'm at a loss to know why we would object to good government amendments. I understand the majority leader's reasoning. We now have 5 amendments pending on this bill, $60 billion. You take 5 or 6 of the agencies, this bill is going to be more than what all 5 of those agencies spend in a year. In this bill is 64% of this bill won't even get obligated until 2015 at the earliest. I also would remind my colleagues on a $64 billion bill, under our rules, we don't have to offset any spending anywhere under the rules. So this $64 billion, when we know we're wasting hundreds of billions every year in agencies throughout this government, we're going to borrow $64 billion and not do the good government cleanup, transparency. One of our amendments is about creating a website so everybody can see. One of our amendments is about not having no-bid contracts or sole source contracts. And we have all this experience from Katrina, where we know how the money was wasted, and now we're precluded from putting amendments on the floor that would keep us from wasting that very money in this emergency supplemental bill. It shows the dysfunction of the Senate. You know, in 2005 and 2006, we would not have had this happen. Amendments would be offered, they get voted down or embarrassed into not asking for a vote or withdrawn. Now we're going to pick and choose good government amendments. In other words, we don't want good government. That's what we're saying. And we don't want to do the hard work of making things efficient and effective when we go to spend $64 billion. I don't get it. I don't understand it. Generations will not understand it that follow us. I yield the floor.
Senator from Montana.
Mr. President, I rise today to offer condolences, and I would ask unanimous consent that it be placed in the proper spot in the record.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I rise today to offer my condolences to the families and the communities of Newton, Connecticut, and also to offer my condolences to the families of Daniel K. Inouye, Senator from Hawaii. For nearly a week now, my thoughts and prayers have been with everyone in Connecticut and all those families whose lives have been changed by the murders in Newtown. Like so many Americans, Charlotte and I continue to struggle with the news. We prayed for lives that were lost. We grieve for their families, their loved ones. As a former teacher, but more importantly as a father and a grandfather, I can't begin to make sense of the violence, especially against children. Children, our future, the same age as my grandkids, exposed to the unthinkable actions of an assassin. No one can make sense out of it. I don't think we ever will. But we can offer hope. We can offer our solidarity as Americans who unify in tragedy to look ahead, shaken with grief, but strengthened with courage. In the days and the weeks ahead, we will work together to address the unspeakable violence that has hurt our nation. As a senator, it is my responsibility to address the growing issue of violence in America, particularly as it applies to schools and public places, and to stand up to ensure the safety of our children. Now, while we mourn the deaths of innocent children and their educators, we must bring ourselves together for an honest, real national conversation about every aspect of this terrible attack. It will be a difficult conversation, but it is the responsible and necessary next step for the children of this country, for the children of Montana. And I look forward to rising to the challenge. Earlier today, I had the opportunity to sit in the President's chair, and I heard many members of this body speak of Senator Inouye. Some spoke as a distinguished voice, a senator's senator, a great hero, a true patriot, a singularly iconic leader, an incredibly great man, a giant of the Senate, a mountain of Hawaii. The list goes on and on and on. You know, they say the hardest thing to get in life is a friend, and the easiest thing to lose in life is a friend. Danny Inouye was a friend. I'll never forget when one of my neighbors came out to visit me. Dan's office is right next door to mine in the Hart Building. Came out to visit. Now, make no mistake about it, before I came to this body, I knew Dan Inouye's past as a war hero, part of the Watergate Investigative Committee. He truly was somebody that I knew before I got here through the media. Well, so did my neighbor. But after I'd been here for a while, I started to take Dan for granted. He was just one of us. My neighbor was there, and we were standing in the anteroom of my office, and Dan Inouye came walking out of his office, and my neighbor's eyes almost fell out and rolled across the floor. He wanted to meet Dan Inouye. Why? Because he was a great American. And he knew it, and he knew this was an opportunity that he shouldn't pass up. I stopped into their office today, into Dan Inouye's office, and passed along my condolences to the staff, and had the opportunity to walk back into Dan's office. One of the things that was pointed out to me was a sugar contract that sat right above his chair, right in front of him, what he looked at every day when he sat at that desk, the sugar contract that his parents had. Why? So he didn't forget where he came from. And all the time Dan Inouye served in this body, he was probably as grounded as anybody ever could be, because he never forgot where he came from. When I first got here, I was trying to get on the Appropriations Committee. I went and visited with Senator Inouye. He said he'd help, and he did. When Dan Inouye went to Montana, well, actually he was going to Cody, Wyoming a few years ago. He flew into Billings, Montana, drove down to Cody for a veterans event. He drove through forests that were brown and dead, came back and asked me what's going on with the forests in Montana. And I said, Dan, I've got a bill called the Forest Jobs and Recreation Act that will help remedy that problem. Dan's response was sign me up as a co-sponsor. He was always there to help. I remember one time in the cloakroom, he was telling a war story about after he got his arm blown off. They were laying in stretchers in the 40s, which medicine has come a long way since then, remember. They were laying on stretchers, and he was talking about, and there were many folks there, many had multiple limbs that were missing. And he said there was a man of the cloth that was giving last rites, and they came to Dan, and Dan said, no, I'm not going anywhere. And he stayed with us, thank goodness, and came to the U.S. Senate, came to Congress and then the U.S. Senate. What a man, what an incredible man he was. He always sat at our table at caucus lunch, and when he came in, he referred to me as Big One, and then proceeded to lecture me as to why I needed to lose weight if I was going to stick around here for a while. I always appreciated that. Another time we were in his office visiting about some legislation, and out of the blue he asked me how many men I had on staff. And I was going down the list counting them, and he says, you know how many I got? I said, no. He said, I got 2. It's because women are better. That was Dan Inouye. He also had a connection to probably every state in the Union. Montana was no exception. He always spoke of Mike Mansfield with great passion. And when I was in his office earlier today, on the wall he had a picture of Ted Stevens and LBJ, Warren Rudman, and of course Mike Mansfield. And on that picture, Mike Mansfield, then Majority Leader, had written to my friend, Senator Dan Inouye, with admiration, respect, and affection. I can't say it any better. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
The Senator from Mississippi.
I ask unanimous consent that I be allowed to speak, as has been morning business.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I rise tonight to pay tribute to Jamie Ray Ellis, a beloved member of my staff who passed away on Tuesday, November 27, at the age of 65. Jamie Ellis served his state and country proudly. As a constituent liaison in my office in Tupelo, he handled veterans issues, a role he filled with compassion, ability, and integrity. It was a natural fit. Jamie brought to the position his own background of military service and experience as a volunteer veteran service officer for the local chapter of the Vietnam Veterans of America. He had a deep understanding of the unique circumstances our veterans face, and he worked tirelessly to make their lives better. His help and kindness will not be forgotten. This ability to work well with others was evident throughout Jamie's career, from his years in public service to his success in business. He knew how to lead, a talent that served him well as president of Ellis Brothers Timber and Wonderwood Products in Mississippi. Before joining my office, he was a valued independent sales agent for Lawson Products in Illinois. Jamie deserved the respect that veterans and others bestowed upon him. He served in the U.S. Air Force from 1966 to 1970, spending nearly 3 years in Southeast Asia, including a year in Vietnam. He then served in the National Guard. In his home community of Saltillo, Jamie was a 32nd degree Mason and Shriner and member of the Saltillo First United Methodist Church. Helen Keller once said, "The world is moved along not only by the mighty shoves of its heroes, but also by the aggregate of the tiny pushes of each honest worker." Jamie was a true and honest worker, like Ms. Keller describes, and he was a hero to those he helped. There is no doubt his contributions have made the world a better place than he found it. I'm thankful to have known Jamie Ellis and to have had him on my staff. My wife Gail and I extend our deepest sympathy to his loved ones. To many, Jamie was a fellow veteran and good friend. To his family, he was a devoted son, husband, father, brother, and grandfather. Our thoughts and prayers are with his family, especially his wife of 42 years, Judy, and their 3 children and 9 grandchildren. He will be truly missed. Thank you, Mr. President, and I note the absence of a quorum.